The reason you're not performing is because your nutrition doesn't match your ambition. So if you want to run harder, recover better, and finally reach your potential, then this is the video for you. So this video is for any GAA athlete who wants to maximize the performance on the pitch through improving your nutrition. I'm going to deep dive into different areas like carb loading, supplements, hydration, macro splits, calories, and a few other areas. But before we get into it, if you haven't yet, subscribe, like, leave a comment, because there's going to be loads more coming over the next couple of weeks and months. So the first thing I want to talk about is energy demands and matching the level of training that you're doing with the amount of energy that you're putting into your body through food. Energy availability is obviously the first and most important thing. So actually identifying how many calories you need for the outputs that you're going to be doing when you're on the pitch in training or in games. So when it comes to calculating your calories, I'm going to attach a visual on the screen here now that is going to give you a basic outline of how you can calculate your basal metabolic rate, which is going to give you a vague idea of the amount of calories that you're burning on a day-to-day basis. And it'll also allow you to adjust your calories based on, I suppose, the amount of activity that you're doing. So the next thing I would say is once you've got a basic idea of where your calories should be, then it's about consistently tracking your calories on a daily basis while also tracking your body weight. So for example, if it throws back at me that I should be eating 3,000 calories a day, I can eat that amount and track it for a week while also tracking my body weight, and I'll be able to see what kind of trend my body weight is going in. So if I'm eating 3,000 calories a day and my body weight is still going up, then I'm in a surplus, and if I want to be at maintenance, I'll have to take them back down. If my body weight's starting to trend downwards over a period of 1 week, 2 weeks, then if I want to be at maintenance, I'll have to bump calories up a bit. And again, if you want to be at maintenance and your body weight's staying where it is, then you just keep going the way you're going. The next thing we want to think about then is breaking this down into our macronutrients. So your macronutrient breakdown will depend on the level of training that you're doing. So I like to increase carbs, reduce fats on days that I'm training, and I like to increase fats through healthy fats and bring carbs back down a small bit on rest days. And I try and keep protein consistent throughout the week. So the next thing we'll go on to is carbohydrates, because these are the king for all GAA athletes who's trying to perform at the highest level or even just get the most out of the training that you're doing. All high intensity sports will predominantly use glycogen as your main fuel source. So glycogen is basically just stored carbohydrate in the body, and you store a certain amount in your liver and you store a certain amount in your muscle tissue. So it's key that you have those topped up for game day and for training days so that you're able to perform, because once that tank runs low in a game or in a training session, that's when performance starts to dip, because you have to switch to a different fuel source in terms of you have to switch to fat for fuel or protein or whatever it is, and that is not as inefficient of a process as using topped up glycogen as your fuel. And that's why we can sometimes see athletes dip off in their performance level come the last 15 minutes of a game, the last 15 minutes of a training session, whatever it is. Like, even if you think a lot of training sessions could go on 90 plus minutes, and likely come the end of the session is when you're doing top up runs. And so many athletes do not focus on their fueling strategy for training, and they only focus on games. And so if you run low at the end of a training session on glycogen, and then you're doing tempo runs, you're doing intervals, and you don't have glycogen stored, you're not going to get the adaptations that you could have got if you had fueled properly for that session. So that is absolutely key. In terms of how much carbohydrate we're looking for, so my rule of thumb would be on a low day, we're going to aim for between like 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kg of body weight. On a moderate training day, it could be a pitch session that's not overly taxing, it could be gym session days, whatever it is, I would aim for like 4 to 6, usually 4 to 5 grams of carbohydrate per kg of body weight. And then when it comes to your high days, like really big training days or matches or carb loading days, I would aim for between 6 and 10 grams per kg of body weight. Now, 10 grams is on the upper limit, and it's typically not needed for most GAA players. What you would aim for is between 6 and 8 grams of carbs per kg of body weight, and that should be enough fuel to top you up on your loading days and on game day to fuel the demands of the game. So in terms of your carb loading strategy, this should start at least 36 hours before your game. So if you have a 2 p.m. game, you want to start the day before, but even that evening meal 2 days before, in terms of getting your carbohydrates topped up. So what we're going for is easy to digest carbohydrates that are low in fiber. We want our meals to be low in fat, and we want to keep protein moderate. So this is where a lot of athletes go wrong. They just eat as much as they possibly can, as much calories, and then it was actually over the last couple of days when I put out the Q&A box that a lot of athletes were coming with questions that every time I carb load, I feel sluggish in the pitch. And the reason you feel sluggish in the pitch is because you have not put a focus on reducing fats and reducing fiber and eating easily digestible carbs that don't feel really heavy in your stomach. The more fiber you eat, the more fats you eat, those require more energy to actually break down in your gut. And that's going to take up energy, it's going to take space in your gut, it's going to take longer to digest them, and that can leave you feeling sluggish and tired for game day. So that is absolutely key. It's not about just going and eating whatever you want. Yes, your calories might go up by 200 or 300 compared to where they were. But when athletes go and they just try and eat as much as possible and get as much carbs in as possible without putting a focus on what they're actually eating, they typically will end up eating like 1,000 calories more than what they need to be eating, and then you feel like a boss when you're running about the pitch. Examples of that would be like white rice is a big one that I would target. It's so easy to get in, you can eat high volumes and it's going to digest pretty easily. White breads like sourdough or bagels, those kind of things. White pasta can be good, but for me it doesn't really work that well. I can still feel a bit heavy in the stomach, it's quite starchy. So again, it's figuring out what works for you. White potatoes is another good option, but again, I wouldn't go really heavy on those either, because sometimes some athletes can feel quite heavy when they're eating that. And then you've got your other foods that might be demonized at times, but sometimes you just need to top up with things like sweets or squares bars. Cereal is a big one that I would always hammer in carb loading day. It's easy fuel, it's going to top you up, and I wouldn't, some athletes could probably get a bit of fear when it comes to eating a lot of sugar. You still need to be consuming probably high enough amounts of sugar to actually reach the levels of carbs that you need to be eating. So I would, fruit, bananas, low fiber fruits, bananas, mangoes, grapes. I would have raw honey quite a bit on my carb load days. As I mentioned, high enough volumes of cereal and squares bars, things like that can be really useful. But we still want to keep protein in as well. So we're not just hammering carbs, we also need to have some level of protein in those meals to balance out, I suppose, your blood sugar and stuff as well when you're loading up. So in terms of foods that I would try and steer away from to an extent, it would be the likes of like oily foods or cooking with a lot of oil or peanut butters and things like that, or nuts and seeds. I would try and steer away from them, or like fried fatty foods that again don't feel great when you're in your gut and are just going to increase your calories substantially when you're trying to carb load. So butter as well I would try and steer away from, and things like avocado. So those are the kind of food choices. And then you go for, when it comes to meats and getting your protein in, things are going to digest easily. So lean meats like white meat, chicken, fish, I suppose not fatty fish like normal white fish, lean turkey, and like your whey protein, your protein yogurts, Greek yogurts, those kind of things are going to be useful. And then moving on to, I suppose, I'll talk a wee bit more now about protein itself. So the protein is essential. It's basically just the building blocks of your tissues. So when you break down tissue or you go through that, like a heavy training session or whatever, your body's in a phase where it's being broken down and it needs those building blocks from your proteins to repair and rebuild and adapt from the training that you're doing. So that's why you want to be keeping protein consistent in throughout the day. And protein also has that effect of stabilizing your blood sugar when consumed alongside carbs. So that's why you want to keep a focus on getting a good quality protein source in each meal, so that firstly you're optimizing muscle protein synthesis throughout the day and you're getting good blocks of that in, and not having like no protein in 2 or 3 meals and then a big massive one at the end. It's not that it's the worst thing in the world, but it's just better for your digestion, better for your blood sugar regulation, and again, muscle protein synthesis for your recovery and your repair of your tissues. In terms of targets, it's a minimum of 1.6 grams per kg of body fat in terms of what you're looking for. But for most athletes who are training very hard and they need that bit extra, I would be aiming for between 1.8 and 2 grams per kg of body weight on a daily basis. Then on your rest days, like I know I talked about chicken, turkey, whey, on your rest days then you can look about getting your likes of your red meat in, again Greek yogurt, your eggs, things that probably have a bit more fat in them, but also have their benefits as well. In terms of like your health, and red meat's obviously a big one that contains a lot of vitamins and minerals and things like that is going to be really useful for you. So moving on to macro splits based off training days, match days, rest days. So on training and like high load days, you want your carbs to be about 50 to 60% of your intake. Moderate protein, like say 25-30%, and then low fat in terms of like 10 to 15, 20% of your total daily intake. Low fiber again is still important on your training days, and then on your rest and your low days, you would bring carbs back down again to like 30-40% of your intake. Fats can go up to like 30% plus of your daily intake. But one kind of trap I fell into when I was younger and I was trying to optimize all these different things was like completely reducing my carbs on rest days and then like upping my fats to like stupid levels on rest days as well, because I was trying to get healthy fats in. But I would still keep a decent level of carbs in and not pull them back completely on rest days, because you still need to replenish your glycogen stores from the training you're doing both in the gym and on the pitch. And then you want to top back up for that session that you're going to be doing maybe the following day as well. So always try and keep a bit of a balance, but you're just putting a bit more focus on fat and fiber on rest days or like training days in the gym where you're not going overly heavy. Then when it comes to your rest days, this is your opportunity to really go after like your fruit, your veg, like healthy options that are good for your health and for your recovery. Good whole foods, high fiber, like potatoes skin on, fruits skin on, berries, nuts and seeds, trying to get your antioxidants in again through your berries, like dark chocolate, things like that. I would try and put a focus on your leafy greens on your off days because they're going to be higher in fiber, they're going to take more time to digest, and you kind of want to steer away from them, as I mentioned, on your heavy training days. So it is really important that away from those training windows that you're still getting those good healthy micronutrients and antioxidants into your diet to maximize, I suppose, your health, for, like, first and foremost, but then also your recovery as well. So then we can go into, I suppose, like recovery nutrition, which I've kind of talked a wee bit about there in terms of getting your micros in and your antioxidants. In terms of like straight after a heavy pitch session or a heavy game, in terms of targets, we want to be aiming for at least 1 gram of carbs per kg of body weight and between 0.3 and 0.4 grams of protein per kg of body weight in that meal straight after the game to get that recovery process going straight away. In terms of hydration, you're going to lose quite a bit through sweat when you're playing, when you're training, and you want to replace that after a session. So trying to get in a litre of water with a bit of electrolytes, a bit of salt, even salt in your meals can be helpful to replace that and ensure you're not going in dehydrated, and which is going to impair the whole recovery process after a game or after training. So it's important that you put a big focus on that, and then that's literally straight after game, and then maybe an hour or two after is when you're going to focus on your full meal, where you're going to try and again get a sufficient source of protein in and carbs again, and you could even probably include some healthy fats in that as well. So in terms of an example of a recovery meal, so straight after the game or after the heavy session, it could be something like a chocolate milk, which is going to be some fast action sugars to replenish your glycogen stores, and then a good source of protein as well to get that recovery process going. And then a few hours later it could be something like a chicken curry and rice with water, juice, electrolytes, things like that. So in terms of game day fuel, I'll just run through like a small example of what this may actually look like. The night before a game, it could be something like a spaghetti bolognese with lean mince. It could be rice, chicken, broccoli as the classic. Again, I would actually tend to kind of limit heavy fibrous vegetables the day before a game even, but a small amount of broccoli isn't going to have much of an impact. So your rice, your chicken, and then a sauce of your choice that isn't high in fat is going to be 100%. And then I would also add like a wrap or sourdough or bread towards that as well. That's going to be moderate protein, it's going to be high in carb, and it's going to be relatively low in fat as well. The breakfast, 3 to 4 hours before a game, overnight oats with a scoop of protein mixed in with banana, honey, and cinnamon or whatever. It could be just a bowl of cornflakes, like a large bowl of cornflakes with milk and like a protein yogurt on the side and some fruit. That's just a simple example of what you could have, where you could have protein pancakes again with protein yogurt and some fruit as well, and honey. As you move closer towards game time, then you want to top up your carb sources or your glycogen stores again, just to make sure they're fully topped up going into the game. So this is something where you're in for simple carbs like banana, an energy bar like a Squares bar. It could be a rice cake with honey, it could be a slice of white bread and banana and honey, something like that, just to keep things topped up going into the game. And then when it comes to your in-game fuel, you're going to be thinking of things like isotonic drinks, like you said, sport. Again, it could be banana, it could be dates, things like that, just to keep things topped up in the game and to ensure that you're not running low. Something I've been using over the last while is just an energy gel at half time. Easy to digest, you have it down you within 30 seconds, and it's like 30-40 grams of carbs, just to make sure that come the end of that game, I'm not running completely low on fuel and it's not impacting my performance. So post-game meal then, I've already talked about that in terms of your chocolate milk, something that's easy to digest and then gives you that bit of time then, if you're someone who does struggle to eat after a game, to like settle. You've already got a bit of fuel in the tank, and then you can have your big meal after that. The next thing I want to go through is just hydration. So even like a 2% level of dehydration can lead to a drop in performance as well on the pitch. So for me, I like to get my electrolytes in actually before the game. So 60 to 90 minutes before, I'll top up with like 300-400 ml of water or juice, and I'll have like a full teaspoon of sea salt in that. And I also have an electrolyte mix that I bought from Bulk Powders, which has a decent blend of sodium, potassium and calcium. So to get all of those in, which is important and can have a small impact on cramping and stuff in games, and it's just to ensure that's topped up. So make sure that is not your limiting factor going into games, because it's just an easy thing to control. So that's before the game, in terms of 90 minutes to 2 hours before the game, and then you just want to be sipping on, like, your Lucozade Sport is going to be a good option, or your Powerade, because you're going to have electrolytes in there already, you're going to have your carbohydrates, and you're going to have plenty of fluid. So that's what I would advise probably then as you get towards in-game hydration. And then post-game, as I mentioned, you're just trying to get your water back into you, and your electrolytes, your chocolate milk, those things are going to be really helpful. So the next thing is supplements, and I might run through this in more detail at a later date, but in terms of the big rocks, like whey protein is obviously going to be a big one in terms of just making sure that you're hitting your protein goal. If you're already hitting it through real food, then you don't really need to be adding it in. Like, for example, I've went the last month or two without whey protein because I've been able to get my protein in through food anyway, but for a lot of athletes that's not the case, so it's such an easy, handy way of getting good high quality protein in day to day. So the next one would be creatine. I don't really need to say much. Like, creatine is just an essential really for any athlete at this stage. 5 to 10 grams daily for the foreseeable. Like, in terms of repeated sprint ability, cognitive function, those kind of things, it's just absolutely key, like, to get an extra few percent out of what you're doing. Firstly, instantly improves performance in the pitch, and secondly, can improve your actual adaptations that you're getting from your training in terms of your speed, your conditioning, your strength. So yeah, don't overlook that. Caffeine, huge performance booster. There's enough studies done on that as well. Most people probably don't actually take in enough caffeine before games to see true benefits. So what you're typically looking for when it comes to your caffeine is around 3 to 4 milligrams per kg of body weight. Now, for me, at 95 kg, that's quite a significant amount of caffeine, and I probably rarely actually get close to that. But in terms of the performance benefits that you can get from it, that's what you'd be looking for. So again, whether that's from coffee, some people don't like that, it could make you shit yourself, but Monster is another one athletes use. But caffeine tablets and caffeine gum is probably going to be the safest one in terms of actually being able to get that in without the negative effects that come with it. Other ones that I've been experimenting with over the last while is beta-alanine and beta shots. Beta-alanine works in terms of buffering the lactate in the body, which is like that feeling you get when you just feel this burning sensation in your muscles when you do really high intensity exercise, and I suppose it just works in kind of delaying that feeling slightly. I've been taking between 6 to 10 grams daily for a while now, and it does take a while to kind of build up enough in the system to get the benefits from it, and there is quite intense tingling sensations when you first start using it. So I would always start very low in terms of 3 grams and build up from there. The next one would be beta shots, which is basically just nitrates, which can have a positive impact on blood flow and things like that, and oxygen delivery to your muscles, which can have a minor impact on your performance, and there's been decent studies done on it over the last while. So yeah, I've been using those coming into games just to probably get an extra 2-3% out of it, but again, it's costly enough and it's probably not really worth it for most players, but if you have the funds there, then go for it. Magnesium is another one I would use for sleep, magnesium glycinate, and I've been kind of upping my dosage with that as well, and taking 500-600 milligrams before bed, and I found that having a positive impact on my sleep. So again, magnesium is one that a lot of athletes will be deficient in, so trialing it, seeing how it impacts you, and going from there is probably the best bet. And I think that's most things that I want to run over today. So it has been pretty vague, and I just wanted to give a brief enough overview of nutrition when it comes to performance. Hopefully down the line I'll be able to now go into more depth and different topics as well. The biggest thing, to be honest, with nutrition is taking ownership of your nutrition, and I suppose doing things like your weekly food shop, tracking your macros, tracking your calories, tracking your body weight, seeing what foods work for you, what foods don't work for you, and taking, I suppose, full accountability for that and going from there. And then you can dive into the more specifics of nutrition after that. But I suppose those are kind of the big rocks, and I suppose you can work in more depth with coaches and things, and this is stuff that I kind of work through in more depth with my one-to-one athletes in terms of going through their food diary, looking at what they're eating, looking to see if they're getting enough of a certain macronutrient, say for example if it is protein, if it is carbohydrates, if it is enough healthy fats, if it is enough micronutrients or antioxidants, and kind of going from there. But stay tuned, because I'll hopefully have more coming when it comes to this as well, and if you do want to learn more, get to know more, then I do go through in more depth in terms of within the 365 athlete and within my one-to-one coaching when it comes to nutrition. So stay tuned. Again, as mentioned at the start, like, subscribe, comment, it all helps, and yeah, see you in the next one.